On May 2nd of this year, a leak of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito's draft rule in a Mississippi abortion dispute showed that the Supreme Court had voted to overturn Roe v. Wade. I'm just going to cut in right here because I shot this video before the Roe decision was official, and now that it is, stay tuned to the end to see what we should do next. To be clear, overturning Roe v. Wade would not result in a nationwide ban of abortion. However, it would allow for about 26 states to ban abortion, and that includes
Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Georgia, Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, West Virginia, Wisconsin, Wyoming.
What's even more troubling is that banning abortion is extremely unpopular and does not even reach over 30% of approval in any state, despite pro-life proponents being very loud about how abortion is immoral, murder, and so on. So if banning abortion is really unpopular, why are 26 states highly likely to do so? It's really because most, if not all of these states are Republican strongholds where the people making decisions about the bodies of women, women of color, trans folks, non-binary, and queer folks are old-ass boomer white dudes that think this form of healthcare is immoral. And they are quickly doing so to reach Texas-style levels of restrictions on abortions to ban them after 6 weeks, especially if cardiac activity can be detected within the embryo. A law so obviously written by cis-straight white men, since many people are not even aware of being pregnant to up to 4 to 7 weeks, or in some cases for up to 30 weeks. Now you might be wondering, Luis, isn't better off left about local Los Angeles news and politics? California and Los Angeles are safe from such a Roe v. Wade overturn. Ah yes, sunny liberal California must be safe from backwards conservative politics. Right? Right?
Beautiful LA. As every year passes, liberal politicians in LA become even more conservative in their ideologies. From being allies with fossil fuel industries that pollute low-income neighborhoods of color, ramping up the displacement of unhoused people by making being unhoused against the law, and emphasizing their desire to further fund police. Take Rick Caruso. He is currently running for LA mayor and is neck and neck with Karen Bass. Although I found none of the mayoral candidates desirable in the least bit, Caruso is an interesting case though, since he seems to be your run-of-the-mill LA Libby Democrat. Many libs in LA are moderates though, really. But upon further inspection, Caruso looks a lot more like a conservative, and a committed one at that. He is a former registered Republican, and despite showing support for Newsom's programs to codify abortion protections in California, Planned Parenthood themselves issued a statement calling out Caruso for his former support of anti-abortion legislation and politicians that would either cut funding from Planned Parenthood or just ban abortion altogether. This comes directly from the Planned Parenthood statement, and I quote, "Just a few years ago, you provided financial support for Kevin McCarthy's campaign, a man who called himself a staunch anti-abortion rights advocate. You also held a fundraiser for Mitt Romney during the 2008 presidential primary, despite the fact that he has repeatedly identified himself as proudly pro-life. In 2017, you provided significant financial support to the National Republican Congressional Committee, a committee whose chairman signed an amicus brief to the Supreme Court asking the court to overturn Roe v. Wade. You also supported Mitch McConnell's campaign in 2007. McConnell later worked to limit women's access to abortion and sought criminal punishment for doctors who provided constitutionally protected healthcare services for women around the country. Although there are a lot of privileges that people from LA and California are afforded, that does not make us immune to neoliberal and conservative politics. Remember, these people do not care about you, but the financial and political gains of themselves. Although Karen Bass is no member of Vanguard People's Movement herself, LA libs aren't any better. I in no way support her or Caruso at all, but please LA, let's not have an anti-abortion conservative as mayor. Now I think understanding anti-choice talking points and disarming them is important. Not because debates amongst friends and families are somehow going to fix the world's ills, but going forward in this video, I want to accomplish two main things. I want to provide talking points and understanding for those who are pro-choice. I want to do something that's been missing in this conversation, and that's conceding to pro-life terms of argument. If that second one throws you off a bit, that's fine. Just stay with me here. Pro-lifers believe that life begins at conception as soon as it happens. Some of the most conservative and Christian people and politicians believe this, but as a lot of us know, their entire worldview goes against their pro-life stance. They want to say that a conceived egg is alive as if they're suddenly Zen Buddhists and they believe that the tiniest protozoa has as much value as developed life. I mean, they can believe this, but they don't. They go from eating unholy amounts of meat and animal products. They support laws that defund social safety nets for the poor and the hungry. And they support politicians that continue to fund endless wars overseas and here at home. A lot of anti-choice people will point to late-term abortions as especially immoral and act as if they're rampant throughout the country. But really, late-term or third trimester abortions make up 3% of them, whereas 92% of abortions are in the first trimester. But they're only done when the life of the carrier is in danger. Ultimately though, this might not be all too compelling for a pro-lifer, as they will point to the value of the baby's life and other objections. But there is a major problem happening when politicians and the general public at large are talking about abortion. The problem is this: they're playing a debate version of basketball, if you will, but they are playing on two completely different courts. One court believes that life begins at conception and the other doesn't. And the belief part is important because life is not only hard to define in general, but there does not seem to be a fact of the matter of whether life begins at conception or not. I don't want to focus on here too much though, since it is a bit of a detour. All there is to the belief that life begins at conception is just that: belief. So because both camps are talking about the same issue from two different perspectives, it ends in unproductive and stupid debates. So that pro-choice and pro-life can finally get to a conclusion of whether abortions are moral or not, I will concede to pro-life terms of argumentation. I will for now concede to the idea that life begins at conception. I am going to play on their court. Now, for this argument to work, imagine that you have been kidnapped. An American philosopher by the name of Judith Thomson constructed a defense of abortion that was predicated on the same premise that I've currently laid out, playing on the same court as pro-life believers. So for now, we will concede that life does begin at conception, and the value of a fetus is equivalent to the value of an adult. She asks us to imagine ourselves being kidnapped and waking up back to back next to an unconscious violinist. This famous musician is suffering from kidney failure, and a society of music lovers has searched through medical databases to find that you are a perfect blood type match for the musician. You are now plugged into the musician through needles and tubes so that he may live. You are given the option to stay or to leave. If you leave and unplug yourself from the musician, he will die. But if you stay plugged into the musician, you will both live and you will be released after that time period. Now ask yourself a question: are you morally required to stay plugged into him? And what if the time span was longer than 9 months? 9 years? If you would stay plugged into the musician for the duration of that time period, then that's great. You have done a kind and generous deed. However, if you, a pro-lifer, would unplug yourself from the musician, then this is contradicting your worldview. If you believe that life begins at conception and that fetuses, no matter the trimester, are worth just as much as that of an adult life, then why would you unplug yourself from the musician, allowing him to die? Again, if you decide to stay plugged into him, that's great. Good for you. but are you morally required to do so? Are you morally obligated to stay plugged into this person? Whatever reaction you are having, whether you know your answer or not, that is good. You are beginning to feel the pull of this thought experiment. Thompson points out that this hypothetical scenario, especially since it was a kidnapping, is similar to cases where people have been R-worded and now carry the product of that. Pro-lifers believe that all unborn people have the right to live, since the unborn child is innocent in all of this. Since they do believe this, how do we argue for the unplugging of ourselves from the musician? How do we create a good defense of abortion while using this thought experiment? Many pro-lifers believe that all abortions are morally impermissible, even if it is to save the life of the carrier. Because of this, they believe that abortion is murder. But for now, let's return to the musician. Thompson then asks us another question. What if after a few weeks' time of being plugged into the musician, a doctor comes to you and tells you that the procedure is taking your life, and in 1 month's time, you will be dead, but the musician will live on? Are you just supposed to wait there until you die? Thompson believes, as do I, that no one can make a good argument saying that unplugging yourself from the musician is murder, despite him being innocent in all of this. This is then the case for pregnancies that endanger the carrier. There are two individuals, the carrier and the fetus. They are both innocent, but the fetus is threatening the life of the carrier, and no one should be able to decide what happens except for the carrier who is being threatened. So ultimately, a person whose life is being endangered by a fetus can defend their life by aborting it. And even though these cases don't always happen, the same argument can be made since the full weight of this thought experiment has been brought out. Mainly that no one has a say on what happens to your body but yourself. And although that statement might come with its own can of worms, it does successfully defend abortion rights whether they are in physical danger or not. They are not morally obligated to carry that fetus to full term. Just like you are not morally obligated to stay plugged into a musician who needs to borrow your kidneys for 9 months in order to stay alive. If you do carry a fetus to full term, or you stay plugged into the musician in this hypothetical scenario, awesome. But those who can't do the same should not be punished or banned from having an abortion. I made it back from being connected to the musician. And yes, I did unplug myself from him. So to summarize, we made a West Coast defense of abortion, meaning that despite the rest of the country claiming California to be a leftist safe haven, we showed how the rights and needs of the working class of this country are always in flux and never fully protected no matter where you are. Just in a perpetual state of being up in the air, even if they are more protected than in other states. We then tackled common right-wing talking points, and we used the thought experiment of a famous musician to show that no one has a moral obligation to let someone else borrow their body. Because if you believe that the value of a fetus life is equivalent to the value of an adult life, then you must commit yourself to being plugged into the musician. But if you would refuse the musician to borrow your body and save his life, then you are agreeing with leftists everywhere that people carrying fetuses to term are not morally obligated to do that. Understand the many reasons why people get abortions to begin with, and not actively supporting anti-choice legislation and politicians can hopefully lead to conversations of this country eventually providing healthcare in all forms, further proving that we are better off left. Bye everyone. So it is official, Roe v. Wade has been overturned by these boomer ass fucking animals, these pieces of shit. And it's very scary for a lot of people, for a lot of women of color, trans people, because a lot of people will unfortunately die through back alley abortions. Not necessarily that they've banned it like federally, but they've essentially banned it in many states because they'd essentially said any state that wants to do so can do so. So despite banning abortion being extremely unpopular, Republican fucking psychos in about 26 states, 25 states will for sure do it. Texas has done a 6-week ban, and I assume, or I predict rather, that many states will follow in that type of ban, or even just an outright ban altogether. And I made this video for a couple of reasons. The first being that if any politician or if any like right-wing person on the internet or on TV or something tries to make
being anti-choice, being anti-abortion, about morality, about the life of human beings, that you can just straight up call them out on their bullshit. Say, no, that isn't true. Because if you were genuinely pro-life, you would take the climate crisis a lot more seriously, right? You would fund social safety nets for the poor and the hungry, and you would defund the police. Essentially, if you were genuinely pro-life, you would be like a socialist. You would be on the left. It's really, if we're being honest. Imagine that you're like connected to someone who needs your body, because most people wouldn't lend their body to a stranger for 9 months. And I go at it from this angle because conversations about abortions are super, super circular. So rather than going on this like vicious, like argumentative circle, I want to say, okay, well, you believe that life begins at conception and its value is the same value as my life, but say that you had to be strapped to an adult. You wouldn't feel the best about that. So no one's really brought up the thought experiment of being strapped to the musician, and I thought it was a great philosophical thought experiment to bring up. So I thought that that would help further leftist discourse about being pro-choice, and would really just shut these fucking anti-choice conservatives up. Because now we thought fascism was alive and well in America, and it certainly was before this time, but now it is alive and well. It is here. There is fascism in this country. People do not want a ban on abortion, yet Republican freaks will ban abortion to some degree in 25 states. They will do it. They can do it, and they will. So now what, right? What do we do now? Well, I can't stress organizing enough. If you're leftist, or if you're baby leftist, or you're liberal, whatever, you need to organize in your community. You need to get out there, okay? You need to study, then you need to get on the streets. You need to build coalitions. Organize till we build a strong people's movement that is genuinely able to make these tangible and legitimate threats, that if you do not govern according to the rights and needs of the working class in this country, then we will stop going to work, we will stop paying rent, and we will be on the streets, we will be outside of your homes, we will be outside city halls to make sure that you finally do what you're supposed to do and you govern according to our needs, the working class, the people of this country. So with that, I'm going to put a bunch of abortion funds under the description, abortion funds that help people of color, women of color, trans people, queer people, and Planned Parenthood themselves, of course, get on the street. Not just to a protest, but what do you do after the protest, right? You gotta organize. You gotta organize for this movement that I've been talking about, a people's movement, a strong socialist people's movement that will be able to make these demands. When we don't want something, you can't do it. And especially if it goes against our needs, this form of healthcare a lot of people need. So if you as a politician are going against the needs and health and well-being of your own people, then you can't be in that seat of office. You need to be stripped of that power. Better Off Left will continue its normal news coverage with myself and Leon very soon, so stay tuned for that. I shot this video about 3 weeks ago before the decision was official, so I felt really compelled to do so, and Leon and I will be back very soon. Bye.